installing the main bearings, I wanted to show you something else that's really kind of interesting. I wanted to show you the difference between the two versions of bearings. One is made by NDC and one is made by Taiho. They were both provided by Nissan at some stage. There's two very distinctly different looks to these bearings. One, the color, and two, the number of oil holes in the bearings in order to properly lubricate the cranks. Bearings here on the left are made by NDC. It's a standard size bearing, but look at the color difference, literally. And I think there's a different metallurgical compound. I had a lot of trouble getting information from the manufacturers about the actual metallurgical makeup of these bearings. Now these are the Taiho. Now these are the ones I typically like for all the Toyota motors. And they look almost aluminum. The thing to notice here is the number of oil holes. These are throughout all of the bearings. There's 5 holes to pass oil to the crank. These are singular. Let's take a look at the OEM bearings and see what these are. I think they're just the singular holes. Yeah, so these original bearings are most likely a Taiho bearing. Actually, Nissan put their own stamp on it, they don't say. But the color, that's what's so weird, is the color on these indicates more of the bearing type that the NDC bearing is, except I've noticed the singular oil hole. Yeah, those are very interesting. Singular oil hole. I wonder if that was like that in both of the engines that we disassembled. This one's out of the silver 2000 Nissan Xterra. This one is out of the red one. I'm not sure. The bearings are in there, and they are singular hole. That's very interesting. Well, it makes you wonder which ones are the appropriate ones and which one we want to use. The question I wonder is, how much do they weigh? Are they very similar in weight? This is the OEM bearing that was installed. Oh, this is actually out of the JDM engine, 53.8 grams. This is the NDC bearing that's got multiple oil holes in it, a bit heavier, 60.6 grams. And this is the Taiho bearing, 62 grams. It's even heavier. That's really interesting. So let's look at the this is the OEM different position. There's 3 different sizes of bearings on each crankshaft. .1 for the OEM. 24.9 for the NDC. 26.2, wow, for the Taiho bearings. That's interesting. What's most interesting is the oil hole design here. I'm not sure that this matters because these are the NDC bearings. These actually are labeled safety bearings. I've got a little shop in Denver that's really pretty awesome. They have the ability to get all of this stuff from Safety, is the company out in California, made in Japan. That's what I usually look for. Can't buy from them directly because I don't buy enough, but the shop in Denver allows me to get these. And what I noticed right off the bat was the difference between the NDC and the Taiho. There's literally a Nissan part number that's different for the bearings that came from Taiho and the bearings that came from NDC. So that's actually pretty interesting. I'm not seeing Toyota do that with any of their stuff. So these are the NDC and these are the Taiho. And I got this from that same small shop in Denver, but I don't think they sourced these from here. Taiho, yeah, these are original. So, oh, look at this. So these are NDC, this is Taiho. And I even asked them, this is supposed to be a tri-metal bearing also, and I think I even called, no, I emailed Taiho and I asked them, and they said, no, these are tri-metal, which you can't really see, but there's supposed to be a base, and then the meat of the bearing, and then the surface They're all three different materials. Basically indicative of the racing bearings, like King racing bearings, not King's OEM line. They're only bimetal, there's only two. But the racing bearings have three. These bearings appear to be built for a main that's got different oiling, a different oiling system. I mean, the only hole that's in the journal is in the center. So these other ones don't feed anything. In fact, if nothing else, they're probably going to cause turbulence in the channel, as opposed to the Taiho bearings that do not have those. They just have this single oil hole. So, boy, in hindsight, I'm awful tempted to go with these bearings. I may have to do a little more homework. Anyway, something to think about. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting and significant difference in these bearings. So, all right, well, let's get this installed and see where we're at. Let's see how this mics out. We got our bore gauge here, ready to go, all sized to 2.6245, which is the grade on the block is all twos. As you can see here, 2, 2, 2, and 2. So strangely, even though this says the #1 main journal only has these options, the JDM market must have had a much better control. All right, well, we have our main bearing cap loaded. Now we're just going to install this on here, and we're going to do it dry. We're not going to put any lube in here, assembly lube, just because all we're trying to do is mic this out and make sure our clearances are good. So, all right, we're ready to go. Let's stick this on, and then we're gonna put it on. We're gonna torque it in the correct sequence and to the correct torque, just as though we had installed it. And actually, before we do that, it always makes sense after you've done machine work like this and cleaning to run your bolts in. It's kind of time consuming, but it makes sense to run them all in, run them all out, make sure everything runs in correctly and there's no resistance. I even have all my bolts marked so I know which the original position was that they were removed from. So this marks the position where they were in during the removal process. So this was the 7th bolt in the removal process. So when I go to put these back on, I'll put them in the right order, but ironically the torquing sequence is going to be different. The torquing sequence will be different from the removal process, or the installation procedure. The installation position will be different from the removal position. These all feel real good. Now I washed these out with water, dried it with air, washed it with oil, dried all the oil, like WD-40. Just keep things from rusting, because when you use soap and water on this stuff, it will literally rust almost immediately. These all feel pretty good. This one had a little bit of something in the bottom. Let's see what happens when we pull it out of there. Granted, there's been a little moisture. Oh yeah, a little rust in that one. I haven't been cleaning each one, but interesting. They always say too to chase every single bolt hole, every single one that you're going to install something in before installing it, just to make sure that's all good. Because it's really tough to fix those kinds of errors when you're installing accessories on the engines in the vehicle. So we'll grab some 10 mil, some 14 mil, some 17 mil. We'll run all of these. Now those millimeter references are to the head, which is pretty consistent on the diameter. That's not the size of the bolt diameter, the body of the bolt anyway. All right, let's get that cap on. You really got to be careful too. This stuff is so sharp. If I had more time, I'd go back and clean up all these sharp edges. I might do that on the next view. These are just prototypes to see if these work. But by the way, this is the strangest installation of something I've ever seen. Look how this... Well, this is why we do this. This isn't even correct. This whole thing is backwards. Yeah, the arrow's to the front, which means I've got this bearing cap in the wrong location. All right, let's fix that. It's always tough to tell. And this stuff is so heavy that you kind of just want to use logic. Like the logic I had was that the front end was the smallest or narrow if you look at this. So this is wider back here and it kind of squeezes down, becomes more narrow here. If you look at this, it's really tough to tell. Well, I guess really you could do it like this. Line it up against the edge of the... Wow, maybe not. It's really tough to tell. It gets narrower there or narrower there. But this bearing needs to be here. And this bearing needs to be here. So let's swap those. Okay, we got one swapped over. That's an easy mistake to make. You have to be really careful. Always check your work. Okay. And you can always tell, you almost can't do it wrong as long as you're paying attention, because this groove here will not fit here. There's no groove here. That groove fits that groove. All right, let's get this on there. This doesn't fit in there. You literally have to smash that in with a rubber mallet. Smash being the inappropriate key term, but this all looks pretty good. This didn't get shot peened, which is why the color is different. But you can see the grooves line up here at least. So, and always pay attention to stuff like this arrow, that it does indicate the front of the engine. So, okay, let's tap that sucker down and get those bolts in. By the way, when we mic this out, we got to keep in mind these journals. We got to remember that these are probably well, actually, they should only be off by about 1/2 of a thousandth of an inch. Remember the whole temperature issue. We got to look at our thermometer. Oh boy, it's warm in here. This says 60, 70, 88. Holy moly, that could be 88. So for every 10 degrees over 70, which is almost 20 in this case, we're going to be off by 1/10 of a thousandth on an aluminum. These are steel. That's usually about, I think it's about half the rate, but we're almost 20 degrees hotter, so it should be close to about 1/1000th off. So we're going to be a little too wide by 1/1000th, which is interesting. I did find that the spec was right in the middle either way, but I'll have to keep that note in mind and maybe actually redo these again in the morning and see where they're really at. But when we use the bore gauge, it doesn't matter, because this we're setting the bore gauge off of a mic that's already 1/1000th too large. So this will equalize. So this is less important when using this tool. So let's tap that down. We got our relatively heavy rubber mallet, courtesy of our friend Roger. So let's get this on there. So this is the order that we removed these. So I'm going to grab our bolts, put them back in that order, but then I'll tighten them according to the tightening torque. So we've got 5. Just there. Let's figure out what the torque is. Torque specs. Now, those are not the main bearings, that's the rods. I skipped all the way down here, didn't I? Lubricate threads. I leave this stuff laying around for purposes like this. This is actually a 10W30 oil, so we'll just use that. Dipping it in here, letting it drip off, then rubbing the excess off here. and dropping it in. All right, let's get a torque wrench out and get these things going. And do it in 2 or 3 passes. I must not have the right page for the torque specs on that, so I'm gonna grab the laptop and fire up to pull the PDFs. I don't actually have the physical print of these manuals, I've just got the PDFs. So, all right, let's hook this laptop up and see what we can find. Should be on this page, there it is. Print. Actually a bit excited about this process. I've always wanted to be able to measure bearing clearances without using plastic gauge. I don't think my bore gauge is going to work in the rods. Yeah, actually it could probably. The rod bearings I probably could do too. Not the piston pin bore end of the rod, but the main side of the rod. Looks like I might be able to get anything above 2 inches. So as long as they're not under 2, which is what the head is, those are under 2. So I can't measure the bores in the head. So this says foot-pounds 67 to 74. Okay, that's a decent amount. We'll just shoot at 70. I didn't show you, but I just cranked them all down. All right, first opportunity at checking for bearing clearances this way. So bearing clearance, number 1. This is different than the 2000 version. I have a feeling mine are all going to be the same. 15 to 26. Wow, those are very different. Let's see on the 2000. Let's look here. These all say 11 to 22. So, good God, who knows? The 2001 is telling us something else. So, number 1, 12 to 19, 15 to 26 on the others. I don't even know how thick those bearings are. Can't really mic them very easily. It's a standard size bearing. Do they even tell you what the bearings should be? Yeah, they do. Here we go. If I remember right, these were always in the middle. When you go aftermarket, they're all one size. So I'm going to guess I'm going to be trying to figure out what I expect this bore to be. But I don't even know.